Hello and welcome back, and thanks for watching. In our last video we took a look at the claimed improvements in Adobe's Photoshop and Lightroom 2025, and I got a lot of feedback on that because most people agree that the improvements are very minimal and the increasing dependence on AI features for trying to promote the product is really drifting away from photography. So thanks everyone for those comments. I think that everyone's pretty much in agreement. And in this video we're going to take a quick look at the claimed improvements from Adobe in their Denoise algorithms for Lightroom and Camera Raw. And unusually with the new versions, Camera Raw has a feature that's a little bit different from Lightroom. And we'll check out whether they are a real improvement or not. And spoiler alert, you'll probably find that you'll need to go to a third-party product to get decent noise reduction. But let's jump in, have a look at the options, and I'll show you how it works or doesn't work, as the case may be. So I've got a few examples set up here that we can have a look at, and firstly we'll look at the difference between using the Denoise in Lightroom and using the Denoise in Camera Raw via Photoshop. I've got a couple of examples here. I've got a really noisy image of an owl that was taken in very poor conditions, and we'll see if we can retrieve a workable image from that. I've got a photograph here taken of some fungi on a log where there's a little bit of an issue with the focus and maybe a little bit of noise. And one of these things we're going to have a quick look at is there's a new feature in Topaz Photo AI called Super Focus, and that aims to retrieve out of focus parts of an image, and we'll see how that works. I also have an image which is a frame grabbed out of a video on a drone, so I've got about a 6 or 8 megapixel image here from a JPEG from a MP4 video. We'll see how we can enhance that. And then finally we're looking at a rather poorly exposed image taken in Scotland where there was quite a lot of camera movement, and we'll see if this new super focus can retrieve part of this image to something that's almost workable. So let's dive in and look at the first options, which are how we handle the denoising in Lightroom and Photoshop. So firstly, let's look at how Lightroom handles the denoising of a high ISO image. So we take our original RAW file and we'll look at that, and it's pretty horrendous. Go into the develop module, and if we come down and we look in the detail panel, we can select the noise reduction. Now of course the noise reduction still only works on a RAW file. If you've got a TIFF or a JPEG, you've got no hope of doing much denoising. You have to use the old manual denoise, which is pretty much useless. All it does is soften the image. So if we click on the denoise option, it will then generate a new DNG. Now I've already done that. You don't want to be watching the screen for about 30 seconds while it calculates. So here's the option that's come back in the DNG version, and you can see that it's certainly made a big difference of the noise. But hasn't really done anything towards bringing out any of the detail. So it has certainly reduced the noise, but it's still fairly soft. So okay, that's how it works in Lightroom. Let's have a look at how it works in Photoshop. So we'll jump over to Photoshop, and of course what we need to do in Photoshop is to open the file from within Photoshop. And I've just done this so I can locate the file fairly simply, and it will open up in Camera Raw so that we can see what's going on. And I'm not going to play around with any of the other settings. We're just going to come down to the detail section, and you'll see here that here's, if we zoom into 100%, the same as the other one, we now have the option to do denoise within here, and it will calculate and perform a denoise operation, which I believe is an AI feature, so that it links in with some of the AI features within Photoshop. And you'll see that it takes a little while to process. It's about the same time as Lightroom, around 30 seconds to generate this denoise profile, and it will be pretty much the same. Now we do have an additional feature, and I'll explain that in a second. We'll just pause while that finishes calculating. And now we have the denoise applied to the image, and we have We don't have the requirement to go to a DNG, and we now also have a slider here where we can increase the effect. Let's go up to 100% and see what it looks like. It looks as though it's done a lot more noise reduction, but it's also softened the image. So let's go back to where it was about 50%. So one advantage of using Camera Raw over Lightroom is that you don't end up with another version of the file. And that looks to me to be about the only difference between the two versions of denoising. So now we'll take a look at the other options of how we can do much better than this using some of the extra plugin tools such as Topaz, Photo AI and Denoise. So here we are in Photoshop with that image opened, and what I've done is I've stacked up layers with each of the filters applied onto it so that we can just view them quite simply. And what we'll do is we'll zoom into 100%, look at the face on this this owl. Here's the original raw file without any denoise or sharpening applied, and you can see it's very noisy. Secondly, we made another layer. This is the Lightroom Denoise DNG, and we saw it did a pretty reasonable job of removing the noise, but nothing to do with enhancing any of the detail. Now, I did apply some sharpening to this within Lightroom, and it really didn't make a lot of difference. So the next option is the one we looked at just a minute ago, the Camera Raw denoise and sharpening, and you can see compared to Lightroom, there's really no difference between it. So what I did next was I took that original raw file unprocessed and took it into Topaz Photo AI and just applied the denoise to it, and you can see no sharpening really, but what I've done is just applied the denoise feature, and you can see that certainly it's removed the noise from the background. Let's turn those other layers off so that we're comparing it back to the original. You can see there's a lot of noise in the image. It's gotten rid of all of that, and it seems to have somehow retained more of the detail. And maybe it's reconstructing detail that's not there, but it certainly looks okay to me. So the next option I looked at was just using my standard version of Topaz Denoise, not the Photo AI version, and it in fact, just using its default settings, it didn't do as good a job. And this is the first time that I've seen Photo AI do a better job, but we'll hold off our decision until a little bit later. So then if I use the Topaz Denoise and then apply sharpening over the top of that, yeah, didn't really make any improvement over just the straight denoise version. So at this stage, Photo AI has improved the image and brought back some detail. So that's where we stand now. The other option I had here was to go and use this new feature called Super Focus, and let's just let's just make a duplicate here so we can see how it works. We'll dive into our filters, Topaz Labs Photo AI, and this normally opens on another screen, so I'll just drag that across once. So here we've got that raw file opened in Topaz Photo AI, and it will analyze the photograph, and then we would typically add enhancements such as the denoise and the sharpening. Now, for some strange reason, every time I try and do this with my video recording software, it crashes the video recording, so we won't be able to show you it actually at work. But the interesting thing we want to look at is this Super Focus Beta. And what you do with this is that you select an area of the image, it'll do a preview of it, and then you can apply the enhancements. Now, the issue is that it takes a very long time to process. Taking it into the software just to get the preview was several minutes, and then once we said yes, go ahead and process, it took about 25 minutes to process and return it to Photoshop. So obviously we're not going to do that here, but what about the results? If you really wanted to use this photograph, there's no way that you could use it as it is. Let's just cancel out of that and drop back to Photoshop, because I have in fact processed this and sat there and timed it. And what are the results like? Well, I think the results are pretty amazing. Now, you can see here that it's attempted to refine the focus here. Now I am assuming that this is pretty accurate, and they certainly put a lot of detail into the feathers on the bird. It might be a little bit overcooked for some people, but what we can do is we can then just reduce the opacity of that layer back a little bit, just to soften that slightly. But I think apart from the time it takes to process, it's certainly done a remarkable job. If we go all the way back to what we started with our original background raw file, that's what we had to start with, and that's what we've got. I think you'd be pretty happy with the result. Now obviously it's not going to be a workable solution for multiple images over a long period of time, but for the odd image where you really wanted to work up the image, that maybe it was a once-in-a-lifetime image and you're prepared to suffer the processing time, this is the way to go. It's a beta version, so it's not a fully operable version, but it certainly does a very good job. So let's look at a couple of other examples now. So looking at this high resolution image, we could see that Lightroom and Camera Raw's denoise is fairly poor in comparison to Topaz Photo AI and even Topaz Denoise, but adding in that beta version of this super focus has made a remarkable difference. But let's look at a different type of image. Let's look at this one here that was actually taken from a clip from a drone video footage, so it's low res, and it was saved and exported as a JPEG. So the first problem is, if we're working in Lightroom, we don't have access to the new denoise features, and if we want to do this in Photoshop, we have to then convert it to a smart object and then apply the Camera Raw filter to it. But the Camera Raw filter doesn't involve that new AI feature. Let's have a look. Let's make a duplicate of the background and let's convert that to a smart object just to be really clever. And then let's go into the filters and we'll use the Camera Raw filter. So in theory, we're going back and using the same features that we would if we were opening a raw file directly into Photoshop, except that when we come down to noise reduction, we don't have that new feature. Because it's a JPEG, we just can't apply any of that new AI denoise that's available to raw files in Photoshop. So let's just cancel out of that because it's not going to do anything for us, and we'll delete that. So what are our options? Well, looks like we've got to go back and try all of the different options. Now I have applied a bit of other processing to that. You'll see the colors are a little bit more vibrant, but let's have a look at it. So let's zoom in a little bit on the center. This was taken looking down at a dome in Homebush Park in Sydney. It's a dome that has a spiral walkway all the way to the roof, to the top, and I thought it looked rather interesting. So let's just zoom in to 100%. You'll see, if I look at the image size, you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of pixels. It's nearly 4 by 2, so it's just under 8 megapixels, so not super high res, and taken obviously with a very small sensor in a drone. And it's the detail at 100% is okay, but it's not brilliant. This is a bitumen paving area, and you can see all the cracks in the paving because this was all built at great haste prior to the 2000 Olympics, and of course a lot of it has settled and cracked over time. But anyway, let's not get into that story. Let's firstly look at Photo AI, Topaz Photo AI, denoise and sharpening, and it's done a pretty good job. We're at 100%, so this is the maximum amount of detail. This is a seat. This is sort of stone-filled retaining walls, and there's some grass and other foliage growing around here. You'll see it's done a pretty reasonable job of bringing out the detail. So how does that compare then with the normal Topaz denoise and sharpening? Yeah, not a lot of difference. They're actually pretty similar. That's the Photo AI version, and this is the Topaz denoise and then sharpening applied. It's actually probably, again, not quite as good as Photo AI. So Photo AI has had some improvements over the last few months, and it's certainly now very much a competitor. Now, what happens if we try that magic super focus on this? Is this going to be a magic wand that's going to save our bacon with a low-res image and turn it into something magnificent? Well, actually, no. It doesn't really work here. It hasn't really added a lot of extra detail. In fact, there's no more. Let's boost that opacity back up to 100%. And what it's done, if we zoom in over here, you'll see that it's really tried hard to create some focus and detail that probably wasn't there. So I think in this case, for this type of image, I think we'd have to regard that as pretty much a fail. Let's zoom back out to 100% so that we're looking at apples and apples. But yeah, the super focus in this instance, if there's really not any detail to be had because of the low resolution, it's not really going to work for us. So it's not a magic bullet for every situation, but certainly when we compare, if you're working with something like a JPEG image, you don't have access to Lightroom's Denoise, you've only got the old version, and if you use the Camera Raw filter, it's only the old version as well, so your options are limited. Now, it's unusual for me to have a JPEG image to work with, so mostly it's going to be a RAW file, so this is not going to be a problem for most of the time. But let's now have a look at a couple of other examples and see whether there's improvements to be had. So let's now quickly look at another example. This one again was a full resolution 45 megapixel image, photographed in fairly poor conditions, 1100 ISO, and my problem also was that my depth of field was a bit out. I didn't have a tripod, so I was trying to manage camera movement and so forth, and a little bit of the foreground's out of focus. So firstly, let's look at the version with the different noise reduction techniques, and then we'll look at the version where I applied that super focus. So let's jump back into Photoshop and let's have a look. Firstly, this is my version of the image where I applied different options of noise reduction. Let's again zoom into 100%. You'll see noise on this image. It's not too bad. There's a little bit of noise in the background. So firstly, Photo AI and a bit of sharpening applied. The effect is more subtle. You'll probably see it more in the shadows there. But it certainly has reduced the noise. It wasn't too bad an issue, so that wasn't too bad. And if I just did my my previous version, which is to apply Topaz Denoise and then sharpen AI, the results are pretty similar, although it starts to introduce some rather odd artifacts in places, which is something that happens from time to time using that. But looking certainly at the Photo AI version, it's done a very good job. So again, in every instance I've looked at, Photo AI has certainly done as good a job, or if not a better job, than using the standalone denoise and sharpen filters. And then I applied a little bit more work to the image, and it was quite okay, except for this little bit of a problem here where I was running out of focus in the foreground. So I thought, well, let's try that super focus option on that, and I did this again, remembering that it's a version of the file that's pretty high res. And when I looked at applying this in Photo AI, it was a really long time. It initially, and when I say this, I actually only selected the main trunk of this tree to apply the super focus to, although applying it to the whole image doesn't seem to make a lot of difference to the overall time. But it actually indicated that it was going to take 79 minutes to render this, but when I actually set it in motion, it really took 47 minutes. So unless you're prepared to go and have a meal or a haircut or something in the meantime, this is not something you're going to want to apply for many images. But again, if it's a situation where you really wanted to try and retrieve that detail, let's now have a look and see what it did. At 50%, we've got a fair bit of area. Let's turn off the super focus. You can see that it was just running out of focus, and That's the filter applied. It's probably a little artificial looking. Let's just turn that off again and look at the background. But overall it's done a pretty reasonable job. Now I did apply this right across the image and over here, even those were already in focus, and it's sort of smoothed out some of the details. So it's worked reasonably well, probably not perfect, but what I thought, well, okay, it's done a pretty reasonable job. But if we drop that opacity back to say somewhere around 50%, we're still getting most of that original detail, and we're getting a little bit of a benefit of the additional focus. So yeah, it's made some improvement. There is a big time penalty, but maybe that'll be improved over time. So now let's look at one last example where we've got a real issue with a problem image that was taken at the wrong shutter speed with a lot of camera movement. Well, with this last image, you might have asked yourself, why didn't I show you the examples of Lightroom's noise reduction and camera raw? Well, obviously because they're still some way off the mark, and there was no point in demonstrating. They're clearly still inferior to the Topaz versions, and there may be other versions of other software out there that does a better job, but certainly the so-called improvements in noise reduction in camera raw and Lightroom are still some way off what's available elsewhere. So let's just look at our last example, and this is a really quite an interesting one. This was a photograph of an old stone bridge photographed in Scotland, and what happened is that somehow my wife and my cameras got mixed up. My wife picked up my camera and started using it, and she had some of the incorrect settings on, and what happened was she took the photo and it was way too slow a shutter speed, and we've got quite a lot of movement, and yes, it's really not usable as is. Let's just have a look at the options. Well, the first option I tried, which was using Photoshop's Smart Sharpen option, and I'll just quickly demonstrate how that works. We're going to I'll just make a new background copy. If we go into the Sharpen options, we've got Smart Sharpen, and within that we've got things like motion blur. And with the motion blur, what you need to do is to determine the direction of the movement, which I have here, and that's something you can sort of guesstimate, and then you have an amount that you can apply, and then the radius of the application. If you go up too far, it goes completely bonkers. Somewhere about 1 pixel is about the right setting, and then you have a sort of a noise reduction option too. And yes, it can do a certain amount of correction. If you've got a very small amount of movement in an image, that might well work for you. Let's get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. So here's when I applied the Smart Sharpen. Let's just zoom in on this rock here as our example. Using Photoshop Smart Sharpen, well, it's sort of done a little bit, but you can sort of see the blurry outline here. It hasn't really done a lot. So well, I thought, well, if it does a little bit, does some good, why not run the filter again? No, it didn't really make much difference the second time round. So all right, let's try Photo AI and see what it did. Well, it certainly made a better fist of it than Photoshop's filter. It's still not great, but it's a little bit of a better result. We're talking about a fairly poor image. Let's turn those other layers off. So we're looking back at the original, and it's really tried to correct that motion blur. It's close, but not quite there. And then if I used our old Sharpen AI motion blur, very blurry option, and tweaked around, or I played around with the settings quite a bit, it's sort of again trying to get there, but it's a little bit similar to the Photoshop filter. Let's have a look at the Photo AI one in comparison. The Photo AI one again has done a better job. So I thought, well, let's have a look at what else we can do. Sharpen AI, very blurry. No, still no good. Okay, well, let's try the super focus. So I did this on a different version of the image. I just got too many layers on that one. Let's go back and look at it. Here's our original image. 100%, you can see that it's pretty horrendous. It'd be a discard in a normal situation, but let's have a look and see what the Photo AI and the Smart Focus or Super Focus option has done. Now, it's done a pretty remarkable job with that. I would say that this image is now pretty usable. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There is still some sort of semblance of a bit of plasticky look around the background, but in terms of how it compared to the original, which was really probably beyond repair in any other way, but when you look at here and the foliage and the seaweed in the foreground, that's really quite remarkable. And then in terms of how long it took, well, this is the nub of the problem. It took about 20 minutes. Still, it's going to be a slow process and only usable for those things that you really need to. But in comparison to any other option, where you've got a really a difficult image where you don't have any other option, but you want to retain the photograph, and you're prepared to let this run and go and have a meal or do something else for a while, this will do a really good job. And again, it's still in a beta version, or the Americans call it a beta version. It will no doubt be improved over time, but this is certainly a big advance. So in summary, with everything we've looked at, the so-called improvements in Lightroom and Photoshop with the noise reduction, really, I can't see much of an improvement at all. They're still a long way short of what you can achieve with the Topaz Denoise, particularly if you use Topaz Photo AI. It's going to give you a much better result and give you much more flexibility. There are many more options within the package. So I think, again, this is another missed opportunity by Adobe, and there's still some work to do there for them to catch up to the rest of the marketplace. So I hope that's all been interesting, and thanks for your feedback on the previous videos, and let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.